Alrighty, why don't we make a start, everyone? Good evening, a very warm welcome. A very warm welcome to Green College and a very warm welcome to our resident members series. My name is Nico, and I have the honor and privilege of being one of the co-chairs of the resident member series alongside Aaron. We'd like to begin by situating ourselves in Green College on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam people, and that this place has always been a place of learning far beyond UBC or Green College's establishment. For those who are new to Green College or the resident member series, this is a lovely opportunity for members of the college to provide inspiring talks in a warm and friendly manner that have to do with the research or any other interests. The founding of our kind of college and our motto is ideas and friendship. And so tonight you'll be hearing a lot of brilliant ideas, and without a doubt, I'm sure there's lots of great ideas and questions that may be percolating as we continue on the night. But I also want to highlight the second part of our motto, which is friendship. And so the way in which questions are asked and the way that we enter the space is always undergirded and underpinned by those two principles of ideas and friendship, which I'm sure tonight we've got a lovely crowd, and I know there's lots of ideas and friendship to come along and pass along. We are absolutely delighted to have Alex speak, a beloved member of the college who is a master's student in biomedical engineering. And we're absolutely thrilled to have Alex speak on a great talk entitled From Pixels to Pupil, Computer Vision and Augmented Reality on Medical Robotics. Alex will speak, and I heard that there's even some engagement throughout his talk, and then we will leave questions at the very end. So please do, if you're on Zoom or if you are here in the audience, we will pass on the microphone at the very end, and we'll kind of go through those kind of same structures of how Q&A will be undertaken. And so without further ado, please join me in welcoming Alex.
So yeah, hi everyone. My name is Alexander Banks. I go by he, him pronouns. And as Nico mentioned, I'm currently a master's student in biomedical engineering here at UBC. And I did my undergrad in electrical engineering back in New Brunswick. So I know Nico already covered this, but I want to begin by acknowledging that the UBC Vancouver Point Grey campus is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam. And UBC operations in Vancouver more generally are also on the territories of the Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh communities. I also want to mention that as I speak tonight about advancements in medical robotics, I invite us to reflect on the importance of Indigenous knowledge systems in medicine and healthcare. And as a biomedical engineer, I believe that it is essential to work collaboratively with Indigenous communities in strengthening our healthcare systems and creating a space that can better support the well-being of equity-deserving communities here in BC and also across Canada. So just to start off, I'm going to give a little overview of the presentation. So first off, I'm going to speak about surgical robotics and also the training gap in residency training programs that exist in the US and Canada and abroad as well. And then give a little bit of foundations of robotics and the underpinning mechanisms of my own work. And then dive into a project that I'm currently working on augmented reality for the Vinci research kit. And finally, if we have time, I might have to cut it short, but speak about semi-autonomy for obstetric ultrasound and fetal maternal medicine. So first off, I just want to give a little bit, tell you guys a little bit more about myself and how I got into robotics and what really drives my passion for this field. So the top rightmost really pixelated image is me in grade 7 in a science fair. And I worked on making a prosthesis for a 3-legged dog, and her name was Lucy. So that was quite a core experience for myself and my own passions for biomedical engineering. So the next picture on the left is one of the summer internships I worked at in a rehabilitation lab at University of New Brunswick, and we were looking at rehabilitation robotics and how that can impact stroke rehabilitation. Then at the end of my undergrad career, I guess I went back to working with animals. And I developed this brace along with 3 other of my peers for treating rehabilitation for horses. And then finally, the last picture is me and a couple teammates and in my lab that I'm currently working in, and we were developing this system for the Vinci Surgical robot, which you see there in the background behind us. And yeah, it was a great opportunity to work with them, and that's where I am presently in my trajectory in biomedical engineering. So to start off, I'm sure many of you have seen this viral grape video, and it's okay, it's not actually any blood in this one. I saw everyone's reaction. Yeah, so there's multiple benefits of robot-assisted minimally invasive surgery. And to really position us in this field, first off, I'm going to give a little bit of background on the evolution of where RAMIS, which is the acronym for robot-assisted minimally invasive surgery, where that comes from. So first off, for many centuries, people have been doing open surgery. So that's essentially where the surgeon or surgeons perform the operation directly on the patient's body and in an open manner where they can access the organs or whatever you're doing the procedure on. Then in the 70s and 80s, the healthcare field began evolving towards minimally invasive surgery, where we had laparoscopic instruments. So essentially, that's where people can perform surgeries through small incisions in the human body. And you can see that in the middle of that right-hand image, or left-hand image, I guess. And then finally, we have the evolution to robot-assisted minimally invasive surgery. And essentially, the benefits is that, well, what was ending up happening with laparoscopy was that you were doing a surgery with a long instrument, and that could really amplify any tremors that the surgeon had. So this led to the development of RAMIS, which increased the surgeon's dexterity because it had an articulated wrist and also allowed for sensory feedback and 3D visualization. But it also, and more importantly, led to less scarring in patients and also has significantly decreased hospitalization times, which is pretty revolutionary because before people had to wait, for example, for prostate removals, had to wait multiple days to leave the hospital, and now they can receive the surgery and then leave the same day and be able to recover at home. So I have a little pop quiz. Does anybody know what company creates the most widely used RAMIS system? And feel free just to like raise your hand. I saw Evans first.
Striker?
No, I'm sorry.
Something. C, Intuitive Surgical.
Yes. So Intuitive Surgical actually started as a startup company, which is really interesting because a lot of these typically medical innovations are driven by larger companies. And the Vinci Surgical System has been used for over 8.5 million surgeries that has been used for. What you see here on the screen is actually the newest one. It's the Vinci 5. And it actually, there's one of them here at VGH, which is pretty interesting. So just to talk a little bit about about RAMIS, it's currently used in many clinical procedures, including colorectal surgery, Nissen fundoplication, radical prostatectomy, and cardiac surgery. There's over 7,000 of these Da Vinci systems around the world, and about 5% of all procedures are done with a robot. So just to give you guys a little brief overview of how it works, essentially there's 2 parts of a surgical robot. There's the part on the left-hand side, which is where the surgeon sits, and essentially they're able to command the position and orientation of the patient side cart, which essentially has a bunch of instruments that the surgeon is controlling to complete the surgery with. And then the patient side cart has an endoscope on it. So the surgeon is able to see stereoscopically. So that means they can see through 2 cameras to be able to see the world or the inside of the patient in a 3D view. However, there's currently a big gap in surgical robotics, and that's that the training of residents who are completing these surgeries has not yet grown to support the growth of RAMIS in the field. So essentially a high number of chief residents report a lack of readiness for independent practice in numerous different procedures that are listed on the screen. And only about 60% of residents after they've completed their training have received exposure to RAMIS. So essentially a large portion of these surgeons, when they're completing their training, actually haven't used a surgical robot. And this motivates a lot of the work that I'm currently looking at and in developing advanced training systems for surgical robots. So I'm just going to walk through kind of the methods that surgeons are being trained and some of the advantages and disadvantages of these. So first off, we have the apprenticeship model, which is the standard way that surgeons receive training on these. And essentially it facilitates exploration of the real world and allows for a hands-on learning approach. So essentially you have the novice, which is shown on the left, and then the expert, and they have two consoles and they're both working together intraoperatively on the patient to gain clinical skills in completing these procedures. And this is great because it allows for real world explorations. However, some of the drawbacks is that they need to have the expert there at all times to receive guidance. And also guidance is typically only direct verbal guidance. There's not really any other instructions that are able to be given rather than just kind of pointing with the instruments. So this has led to the next area of training, and that's training on dry lab or box trainers. And essentially that's where people complete surgical training tasks with the robot outside of the OR or the operating room. And this allows them to develop translational or skills that are able to transition and be applied in the OR. And this solves the issue that you don't need direct guidance and you don't need to be right there with an expert. However, there's indirectly also the issue that they can't receive guidance or instructions from an expert. So the advantage of this is that they're still able to explore the real world. And like I said, they aren't, there's no dependence on an expert. So next up, we have VR simulators. There's a lot of systems that exist, including the Mimic DV trainer. And there's also a newer simulator that comes natively with the Vinci Surgical System. And essentially the advantage of these is that there's numerous different virtual reality applications that can be developed with these and allows surgeons to practice lots of different skills like knot tying that's shown on the screen there or cutting in VR. It also doesn't require the expert to be there. And there can also be textual or virtual guides. However, again, they are still not able to receive guidance from a real human, and they aren't also able to explore the real world. So this leads us to the final area of training and where a lot of my work is looking at, and that's AR demonstration. So essentially that is where you have a virtual tool augmented on top of the real world. And this allows us to tailor training content, exploration of the real world, and also receive textual and virtual guides. And you can receive guidance from an expert while also trying to follow these instruments and completing either a dry lab surgical training task, or they can be used in surgery to learn how to complete the surgery. However, the main drawback of this is circled here in red. So essentially, the novice can't practice at other time points right now because how the augmented reality systems are set up is that essentially you need the expert there to provide the augmented reality guidance. And I guess it's mentioned there afterwards, but yeah, you need the real-time supervision. So what you're seeing on the screen is the project that I currently developed, and that's the augmented reality tools that are actually able to be played back relative to the scene. So essentially, this allows us to record motions from an expert surgeon and then play them back relative to the surgical scene. So then the novice can follow this. So here's just another demonstration of the system that I've been working on. And essentially, we've been developing a Python package for scene registered AR. So like I said, essentially what you're seeing here are the augmented reality tools overlaid on top of the actual instruments in real time. And the augmented reality tools are registered, or the motion corresponds to the surgical scene. So it's with respect to the surgical scene that you're seeing and not the actual robot. So that allows for like a flexible approach where you don't need to know how the robot is positioned in space. So this is another pop quiz. Essentially, does anybody know what the most common surgical specialty is using Ramus?
Is it D, general surgery?
No. Close though.
Is it B, urology?
Yes. Yeah, so a recent study, so although robot assisted minimally invasive surgery is used in a lot of specialties, including general surgery, about 45% of procedures are urological. And VGH actually has a surgical robot that's used a lot in prostatectomy, but as well as in cardiovascular bypass surgery and also transoral surgery, which is surgery on your neck. So before I dive a little bit more into my own project, I just thought it'd be nice to give a little bit of foundation on robotics. It's something I'm really passionate about, and it'll also help to understand kind of the work that I'm doing. So yeah, I'm just going to take a brief pause on medical robotics and just dive a little bit more into this. So to start off, there's two general types of robots. There's parallel robots, and these are typically stiffer and they're used in high rigidity and high loading capacity. So you can see there on the left is a platform robot, and this is used in rehabilitation. And essentially that's a parallel robot because there's lots of links around the base and they move a platform. So this, like I mentioned, is used for when you have more weight on the robot. And then on the right-hand side, there's serial robots, and they look a lot more like human arms. And typically the end effector is a gripper or a surgical instrument in our case, and they have a greater range of motion. So that's their advantage over parallel robots. And they're also used in assembly lines and a lot of different industrial applications. So our focus on the next couple of slides is going to be on serial robots, because that's what I do my work on with the Vinci Surgical System, because it's a serial robot. So a really key important aspect and concept to knowing robotics is how do you find where the robot tip is with respect to the robot base. And this is necessary because essentially to be able to move the tip of the robot, you need to know where it is in the 3D, where it is in the 3D world. So, and what you see on the image here is a SCAR robot, and it's pretty famous because it's got a simple structure and it has numerous applications in industry for such as spot welding and drilling, like for car manufacturing and that kind of thing. So yeah, so to answer the question, how do we find where the tip of the robot is with respect to the base? Now we're going to do a little bit of math, but essentially how this works is we attach coordinate frames to each joint of the robot. So you can see here that the robot has 4 joints. So, can I have a pointer? Oh, yes. Great. Okay. Okay, so that's joint 0. So this is a robot base. So first you have to put these frames, and these define X, Y, Z coordinates in the real world. So essentially that can tell you where you are in 3D space. So we assign these frames to each of the robot joints. And like I mentioned, there's 4 of them, and right up to the end effector, which is C303. So then we actually have to find the relationship between these joints. And that's done using what's called a transformation. And you see, I put one there that's base to 0. And essentially that defines where the first joint is with respect to the base. And then we go through it all, and essentially we find where the second joint is with respect to the first joint, where the third joint is with respect to the second joint, and then finally where the end effector is. And then essentially what we do is we're able to find where the base is with respect to the tip, which was the whole goal. And we do that by multiplying these 4 transformations, and it gives us where we are in 3D space with the robot. And this is really powerful because we're able to figure out where to put that spot weld when we're doing the industrial application, or where a robot will move in surgical robotics, and where we are relative to the anatomy. And in my case, where we're going to overlay those augmented reality instruments and so to train novice surgeons. So just a little bit more, what I believe is important so that we can conceptualize how these transformations work. Essentially, there's 2 important parts of this transformation matrix. The first one are the last 3 rows, and that defines where you move in 3D space. So it's like a planar movement. So you start at your old position and then you move in 3D, like in a planar movement to a new position, or also the translation is called. And then finally, the top left represents how you rotate in 3D space. So essentially, how are you rotating from that original representation to the new representation. So those are the main important concepts of robotics and a lot of the underlying math of my own work. So yeah, got another pop quiz. How many coordinate frames define the arm of the CMR surgical robot? Also, this is actually my favorite surgical robot, even though I work on the Da Vinci. This one's, I really like the looks of it. Oh, yeah, so also the tooltip on this has 3 joints, but you can ignore that just because it's hard to tell. So ignoring the last 3 joints, yeah, how many coordinate frames define the arm of the CMR surgical robot? Does anybody have a guess?
Someone said 4. I don't know who said it, but I heard a 4.
Okay, so we got 7. Essentially, we have the base of the robot, and then you move through each joint, like I mentioned for the Skyra robot, and right up to the end effector. And like I mentioned, actually, this one has 10, but we can't really see the last 3, so I didn't include those. But yeah, so essentially you assign a coordinate frame to each joint. All right, so now that we have some foundation built, I'm just gonna jump back into my own project with augmented reality. So we see here a video of actually a recording from a surgeon, and they're completing a one-handed ring over wire task, which is a standard laparoscopic procedure training task. And we're using this right now to train novices on the Da Vinci robot. And essentially the way that we go about producing this augmented reality is by doing more coordinate transformations. So I'm going to go over similar to what we just talked about, but essentially how that plays into my own project. So to be able to do augmented reality with the Da Vinci Research Kit, we first have to find where the instrument is with respect to the surgical scene. So you can see that in that transform, which is the scene to the PSM. And essentially that tells us where the surgical robot is moving in respect to our dry lab training task. And then next, we have to know where the camera is also with respect to that scene. And once we know those 2 things, we know where the camera is with respect to the scene and where the tooltip is with respect to the scene, then we're able to project the tooltip in the camera view. So that's kind of defined by this multiplication where essentially you have the camera to the tooltip or the patient side manipulator, and you get that from these 2 multiplications. So I'm going to focus on only the scene to the PSM for this presentation and just give a brief overview of how we calculate that. So essentially the first step, you need to find that camera to the scene. And a big part of my project was computing this transformation. And essentially we do that once at the start of the surgery or at the start of the augmented reality recording. And I think this video is going to play, but what we do is we track these markers, and they're called Aruka markers, and they allow us to find where corners are in space. And then by finding these 2D points in the image, we're able to find the 3D points in the real world, and that gives us where the camera is with respect to the scene. Next up, we have what's called the hand-eye calibration. So essentially, that tells us where the camera is with respect to the robot. And this is a really important transform to know, because if we don't know where our camera is, then you've pretty much like lost the eyes of your robot. So yeah, to compute that, we just kind of move the robot a bunch of times, and it allows us to find that transform. Then also the next transform that we find to do augmented reality is essentially finding the motion of the camera. And we do that, actually, I'm pretty lucky. My robot tells me where the camera moves or where the ECM moves. So I just read it in software, but essentially this tells us where the camera is now with respect to where it was initially. And finally, we find where the instrument is with respect to the camera currently. And how we do that is, I think I have a video, is essentially we touch the corners of those Aruka markers, and then we know where the instrument was with respect to the camera and in corresponding points in space. And then once we know that, we can do this computation that essentially tells us the transform from the instrument to the camera. And then finally, once we've found all 4 of those, we get the scene to PSM. So essentially that tells us where that instrument is with respect to the scene. And that's really important because then we're going to know when we're doing the recording from the surgeon where they're moving the instruments with respect to the surgical scene. So I did some results on this project, and essentially what you're seeing here is us tracking the tooltip instruments. And this is like a new approach to doing it in robotics. It's not using any machine learning or anything fancy, and it runs real time. It's essentially just using a kinematics-based approach with doing these calibrations at the start. And yeah, that's us just moving one instrument and just showing how it's tracking the instrument. So these are just qualitative results of the augmented reality system that I've been working on. So up next are some like more quantitative results. So essentially the 2 important matrices that I talked about earlier were the camera to the scene, as well as the scene to the PSM. So we quantified the error in both of those. And essentially to find that camera to scene, the error in that, we hook on that marker. So you see on the task, there's like a infrared marker. And essentially we can track that with infrared light. And that's like the gold standard of position tracking in robotics. So we compare that to our own tracking method. And we got a position error of about 1.3 millimeters, which is really good. And pretty significant for augmented reality because we're able to overlay those instruments quite accurately and have them play back well to the novice. And then next, we quantified the error of the camera to the PSM. So essentially this is where the instrument is with respect to the camera, which is the overall transformation of what I talked about earlier. And we get about an 8.5 millimeter error, which is good enough for our application, and it's usable. So next off, we got some results, some more results. So this is the surgeon that we're working with. His name's Dr. Cook, cardiologist at VGH. And we got him into the lab and he completed a few of these tasks. And then this is actually his motions, but played back in augmented reality with a surgical task. And this one here is a 2-handed ring over wire task. So you can see that we overlaid what hand they're using on there. So that's used to teach the novice how to complete the task and shift between hands. And this is a really important skill for surgeons to be able to shift between the right and left hands, which might seem obvious, but it's actually tricky to do with the PSM or with the robot. And essentially it allows them to do things like suture tying and needle passing between hands while they're completing their surgeries. So yeah, really grateful that Richard Cook could come in, and currently, so I got my conclusions of this project. So currently we've developed this open source AR software for the Vinci Research Kit. And essentially we're making this open to the community. So lots of different research groups can use it. And something I forgot to mention as well was the Vinci Research Kit is a pretty special surgical robot because it's in about 10 different universities, and it allows us to test these systems on the surgical robots before they're deployed or tested in the operating room. So the AR software we developed is specific to this robot and will allow novices to come in and try it, and hopefully someday this can advance healthcare training. So my vision is that augmented reality system might inform industrial level systems that can then be used to train new surgeons. Also, the work I did showed that I had a small registration error, which essentially means that we're able to show those instruments close to where they actually were in the real world. And the next steps, and what I'm currently, I know I like spammed a lot of people today about participating in my user study. If you saw that email or you got that text, feel free to text me back, I guess. But essentially, yeah, we're working on looking at if this augmented reality system can affect transfer learning, also like situational awareness and retention learning. And we've done some background reading, and it's been shown that AR can affect these things, as well as task completion time And I'm really excited to see what the results are here at the end of my master's of this augmented reality system and how it can impact learning for novice surgeons. And the future directions and where I see this work going is essentially how can we register these augmented reality instruments to phantom tissue? So I'd really like to see it maybe applied in the operating room or applied to simulated tissue to see, can we have the surgeon come in, record their motions relative to the phantom tissue, and then have these played back to the novice to really make a more realistic learning environment for them, which would be a next step after these dry lab tests. And also creating a larger augmented reality recording database. So right now we have 3 recordings. We have the one-handed ring over wire that you saw, the two-handed, and then we have the pick and place task that I showed earlier. It'd be interesting to have a larger database of these so that researchers can explore how this affects learning, and also so that residency training programs can use it. So, okay, I guess I got time for this, so this is great. So this is a project I'm currently working on, and it's essentially looking at how there's disparities in obstetric ultrasound access and how we can tackle these challenges or partially tackle these challenges with engineering. And this is what I'm hoping my PhD research will go into. So it's an area of interest for me currently. So underserved populations, including remote and indigenous communities, face a shortage of professional sonographers. So essentially, sonographers are the people that are complete obstetric scans. And when women are pregnant, they receive ultrasound scans at specific trimester intervals. And it's really essential that they receive this care at specific trimester intervals, because if they don't, there may be health complications of the fetus or mother that might go unseen. And the issue that a lot of rural and remote communities, indigenous communities are facing right now in BC and abroad is that there's a lack of sonographers in those communities to perform these scans. So currently I'm leading a project with a team in the UK and also with people here in my lab, and we're looking at how we can use augmented reality and mixed reality to help support community members in performing these ultrasound scans. Because the issue is ultrasound probes are relatively cheap compared to how much sonographers cost to hire sonographers to come out to rural communities. And essentially there's a lot of work that my lab has done in essentially you can wear the HoloLens, which is shown here on the screen, and have the virtual probe shown in the HoloLens, and then have novices in these remote communities follow that ultrasound probe and complete those scans without actually needing the expert on the ground in those remote communities. And when this is a really powerful tool in a lot of different procedures, not just ultrasound, when you can have people that are not necessarily trained in a specific specialty, but are still healthcare professionals and completing these procedures. So the research that I'm currently working on in my collaboration is essentially, it's great that we have this mixed reality technology. However, there's issues because there's Wi-Fi gaps. Sometimes, especially in low and middle income countries, which limits the usefulness of mixed reality tele-ultrasound, which is MRTUS. And there's also still the expense of hiring a remote sonographer. So when you have this mixed reality system, you still need somebody in a tertiary center, such as Vancouver General, guiding somebody in indigenous communities, such as in Haida Gwaii. And this poses an additional expense that can serve as a barrier to fetal monitoring and growth. So this calls for a need for a semi-autonomy in mixed reality tele-ultrasound. So essentially the idea is that we still have, as of right now, an expert guiding novices to completing ultrasound examinations. But if there is a Wi-Fi gap, we can have a semi-autonomous system, kind of similar to what you have in your car when you go out of your lane and it beeps at you, or Tesla is trying to implement, where essentially you can still receive guidance even when the expert isn't there or is temporarily gone. So just to motivate this a bit, I'm going to speak a bit about what ultrasound scans look like on fetuses. So essentially, when you do an ultrasound scan on a mother, the sonographer typically looks at standard imaging planes, which are standard planes that they, or standard image views that they take on the patient. And essentially this allows the sonographer or the radiologist to measure important growth information about the fetus. So for example, the TVP tells you information about how the brain is developing. The FSP tells you how like their abdomen is developing, and then the ASP is essentially like how long their legs are, which is an important monitoring indicator in growth. So what we're developing right now, and in my collaboration with a team in the UK, is a complete augmented or autonomous mixed reality tele-ultrasound system. So essentially, what we're measuring, or what our system does, is that we have the input to the system, which receives a force and torque and the ultrasound video, and then it can estimate the probe position. And how we're doing that is that we're recording the 6 degree of freedom. So you can remember when I talked about the foundations of robotics, there's the translation in space and then the rotation. So that means 6 degrees of freedom because there's 3 axes that it can move and then 3 axes that it can rotate. So we're collecting the 6 degrees of freedom position of the probe. We're also collecting the force and torque. So essentially how hard is the sonographer pressing on the mother when they're completing these scans. And we're collecting ultrasound video as well as a surface mesh of the patient. And the surface mesh essentially tells us where the patient is relative to the probe. And we're collaborating with 3 sonographers on this and creating a data set of 50 obstetric ultrasound scans. So with the hopes that this can be used to develop machine learning models or other types of models to predict ultrasound probe movement that can then be superpositioned onto mixed reality tele-ultrasound to guide novices in completing ultrasound scans. So just give a little bit more detail about this and where I'm at right now with this project. So essentially, we have this cool camera that kind of looks like a webcam, but it's not really a webcam. It's like an upgraded webcam. So essentially, it has infrared sensors on it. Has 2 infrared sensors and an infrared emitter. So the infrared emitter shoots out infrared light. And then you can see on the ultrasound probe, which is on the bottom, we have that instrumented with some cool gadgets. But one of them is at the very end, you see like a red appendage, and that has some little balls on it. Well, those reflect back infrared light. And you can see in this next image, these are actually what I'm taking from the RealSense camera. And essentially what it shows us is the 2 infrared images. So we're able to find those markers in 2D space, but it also gives us the depth map. And that's essentially where things are in 3D space. And since we are using these infrared markers, we're able to segment. So you can see those little red circles. I just drew those on, but actually our software does that automatically. So yeah, so we can segment where those are in 2D space. And then we find those corresponding points in the depth map. And then essentially we're able to find that 6 degrees of freedom. So that translation and rotation of the ultrasound probe. And that's really powerful because I'm going to be going to the UK to collect this data set. And we're going to be positioning this RealSense camera just above the patient while the sonographer completes the scan. And that allows us to know where that probe is with respect to the patient. And then with that information, we can train these machine learning models that will provide mixed reality guidance. And as well, you can see in the ultrasound probe, there's like a case around the probe. And that was actually developed in my lab by a PhD student. And that's a force sensor in there. And that gives us the information that we need to know about how hard the patient or the expert is pressing onto the patient. And that provides insights into like, oh, are they actually touching the patient or are they above the patient? And allows us to provide more information into our machine learning models to predict this probe motion. So yeah, that brings me to the end of the presentation. I want to thank some of my committee members and collaborators, especially my supervisor, Dr. Tim Salkadian, and also my friend Randy Moore, who's a he's a master's student in my lab and we've done a lot of collaborations together and he's been a really great support system going through my master's. So really thankful for him and everybody else who are committee and collaborators as well. And here are some works cited. I had these linked throughout.